Thank you for joining us. I'm Paris Prokopis. I'm one of the account managers here at MIG, and welcome to our year-end close with Dynamics GP webinar. But before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping items. If you want to, you can either watch the presentation through your mic and speakers on your computer in Voice over IP, or you can choose telephone to dial using the information provided. And then later we'll be having a Q&A time after the presentation, but submit questions via the questions panel and we'll be sure to answer them. And a real quick agenda for today's presentation. We're going to talk a little bit about MIG really quickly, and then we're going to talk about year-end close, year-end checklist, module closing order, how to close subledgers properly, and finalizing and troubleshooting your year-end close. And then we will have a live demo, and as I mentioned before, we'll have a question and answer period at the end of that. So let's begin. MIG specializes in the implementation of financial and business management systems, helping our customers streamline their processes and maximize their productivity. The solutions that MIG works with are Microsoft Dynamics GP, SL, CRM, SharePoint, and Business Intelligence. MIG has been in the business about 15 or so years now, and we're mainly focused on mid-market and enterprise customers. MIG also boasts several certifications. We are a Microsoft Gold certified partner, and we are definitely accredited with the Better Business Bureau. We are also a GSA approved vendor. We have many GSA customers, and we're also part of the National Registry of CPE sponsors. So you can get CPE credits for this. Be sure to let us know if you're taking any of this for CPE credits, and we'll give you an email to send that to at the end. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jacqueline Pride here, and she will talk about the 2014 GP year-end close. Take it away, Jackie.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Paris. I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. I hope wherever you're calling from that the weather isn't as cold as it is for me and some of the other folks. I would like to thank you for participating in our presentation today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jackie Pride. I am a Microsoft Certified Professional for Dynamics GP, as well as an MCT or a Microsoft Certified Trainer. I've been working with GP and Great Plains, because at one time it was Great Plains, not Microsoft Dynamics GP, since before Y2K, which makes me a 15-year veteran of year-end processing. And in a couple months, I'll be boasting that I'm a 16-year veteran of year-end closing. I know from experience that the users find year-end to be a bit daunting, mostly because we only do it once a year, and we tend to forget what are the steps and what are the things I have to remember. I think we all have very busy lives, and when you only do something once a year, you tend to forget some of the details. It's not difficult, but for some of the modules, there are many steps to the process, and there is a definite workflow to it. So today, I would like to talk about what those workflows are, going module by module, talk about some of the more common issues that people run into, and what we can do to prevent them. So I hope the takeaway for today is that you will make some notes and get a copy of this presentation as well, and the things that I'm going to point out to you, I hope you'll take them to heart, and you should have no problems with your year-end processing. A sort of generic year-end checklist is that we're going to finalize all of our applicable transactions in all of our modules, and then we're going to reconcile our submodules to the general ledger. I'm also an accountant, so this one is near and dear to my heart, but obviously we want to make sure that things like inventory, accounts payable, accounts receivable, that the subledgers tie to the balances that we show for those on the general ledger. When we're done with our reconciliation at year-end, we're going to print all of those necessary reports and files because we know we have audits for some of us, and just our year-end files that we keep with all of our balances and proof of our reconciliations. As always, we're going to make a backup when we're finished. It's important to make sure that we always have adequate backups. Secondly, I'd like to mention that it's also important to make sure you test those backups. It's not a bad idea to make a backup periodically and restore that to your test company, and then get in there, log in, and make sure you have all the transactions that you are expecting to have. And when we're done with all of that, we're ready to begin our closing process. If we could go to the next slide, I'd like to talk about what that closing order is. And in years past, if you've attended some of these seminars, or if you have attended some of the Microsoft seminars, this is kind of the generic flow that they show for you. We start with receivables, then we close payables, fixed assets, payroll, general ledger. I like to shake it up a little bit because we're not showing inventory on here. And I'd like to talk a little bit about payroll in that flow. And if you were to look at that and take it on face value, you would think I have to do fixed assets, then I do payroll, then I do general ledger. And that's not true. And I'd like you to make a note of this. Those of you who have worked with payroll already know this, but payroll is on its own schedule. We always close payroll at the end of the year on 12/31. We're done. Once we do that very last payroll cutting of checks in 2014, we're finished. And that is independent of any of the other module closings. We always do payroll on its own schedule, and that schedule is 12/31. If we could go to the next slide, I'd like to show you my version of the module closing order. You can see I've added inventory. This is the actual process flow, and I moved payroll to the end because no matter what, we do payroll on its own schedule. So I kind of put that towards the end of that list. Otherwise, we go through that sequence: inventory, receivables, payables, fixed assets, general ledger, which also includes analytical accounting closures. Those two are kind of together. And payroll, again, is on its own schedule. If you need to remember the closing order or have difficulties with the closing order, like I used to in the early days, I want you to remember this. The mnemonic for remembering the closing order, if you want to write this down, I really pray for good accounting procedures. If you look at that closing order, inventory, I, receivables, really, payables, pray, fixed assets, for, general ledger, analytical accounting, good accounting, and payroll for the procedures. I really pray for good accounting procedures. And don't we all do that at year end anyway? We're under crunch time. We have so much to do. And year end, it all seems to kind of come together in the perfect storm of I've got to do W-2s, I've got to do 1099s, I have to do my final year end, I may have an audit coming up. It's all coming together at the same time. So if we step back a little bit and we look at the process flow and we know what's expected, that'll help us a little bit. We can take a deep breath, be a little zen about it, make our list, and make sure we have a good checkoff list. So remember, you may not have all of those modules, and that's fine, but that is the process flow. Just remember, I really pray for good accounting procedures. So let's start with inventory control. Obviously, inventory, the big consideration there is finishing up your cycle counts for the year, or a full physical inventory if you do that at year end. All the posting of any of the non-recurring kind of inventory batches, running of reports, doing all the month-end stuff. We're going to review the stock status report. And once we're done, once everything is good, we've got our final adjustments in, we're ready to run the year-end closing process. If we have to do transactions for 2015 in the interim, that's fine. So for example, if I need to process any transactions that relate to inventory, but I need those to hit in 2015, I can save those to a batch. Don't post them. Just save them to a batch, set them to the side. When you finalize your year-end and actually do the year-end close, then you could take those particular transactions in the batches and post them for 2015. If we could take a look at the next slide, going down our list of processing, receivables management is next up. We are going to, for that particular module, complete our monthly processes. Again, that's always going to be the first thing we do, get all of our work done, including all of the posting of the batches that are non-recurring. And you'll see me say this in all of the modules. What do I mean by non-recurring batches? All of the single-use batches that I have in the system, I'm going to post those. Yes, I may have batches open that are, let's say, monthly or quarterly batches of information that I post again and again. That's okay to have those sitting out there. But any of the non-recurring single-use ones, I need to get those posted. Those will be transactions specifically for this particular year. I'm going to run my aging reports for receivables as well. I'm going to review that aging, and again, I'm going to make sure that that reconciles to the general ledger. Once I've reconciled to the general ledger against my aging report, I'm ready to run the year-end closing process. And again, just like for inventory, if I have transactions for 2015, that's fine. I can put those in. I don't have to hold on to them. I don't have to have this giant stack of stuff building up because I'm not ready for year-end. I can put those into batches and get on with my daily work and just save those. As long as I don't post them, they're not impacting my 2015 numbers. If we could take a look at the next slide for payables. Payables management, again, we are going to close, complete all of our monthly processes. Just like for receivables, we're going to run 1099s for the vendors that we have associated with a 1099 type. It may not be all of them. Excuse me, you may not even have vendors that require 1099s. But if you do, we're going to run the 1099s for them. Then we're going to run the payables year-end closing process. 2 closes are required if you're not on a calendar year, one for the 1099s, one for the year-end process. If we could take a look at the next in line, that would be fixed assets. Don't know how many of you are running the fixed asset module. Some of you may be. It's a good little module. Quite often when I visit with people, they say, oh, no, I just keep my fixed assets in a spreadsheet. And if you are one of those people, I challenge you for 2015 to get your payables into GP. That saves all those calculations, and you can set it to post those transactions, obviously, to the general ledger, and that's a good thing too, a bit of a time saver. So what we're going to do for fixed assets, we're going to make sure that we have the payables module closed out first. We are going to double check that we've put in all of our transactions for 2014, meaning if we've bought new assets or we have new capital expenditures on the books, for 2014, that we get them in there, make sure we get them depreciated for 2014. If we have retirements, if we're getting ready for that big audit, and the auditors are going to come in and say, how many assets do you have, and they're going to track them back, make sure that you actually have them. You'll want to get the retirements in there if you have laptops in particular that are outdated. You want to get those off the list. So make sure that all those activities for 2014 are posted and finalized. Then we're going to recheck that the final depreciation routine and the interface, which is the posting of the GL accounts, are complete. And then we're ready to run the fixed asset year-end closing process. If we take a look at the next slide, next up in the process flow, and we're going to talk about general ledger towards the end, because general ledger, we don't really have to close it, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. Some people think, oh, I have to close it. I've got audit adjustments. We're going to talk about that, and we're going to dispel some of the myths about general ledger. But right now, I would like to talk about payroll. And the payroll year-end, nothing, bar nothing, causes more anxiety amongst my clients than the thought of the year-end close for payroll. There are many, many steps in the process, but I'm here to tell you, if you make a good checklist, here's what I have to do, here's who's responsible for it, and the timing of it, you'll feel much better about it. So I challenge you for this year to sit down and figure out when your last payroll run of 2014 is, and start working backwards from that into when you want to have some of these options completed. So first up for payroll, we've already said year-end processing always is done on 12/31, meaning we're going to get all of our transactions in and completed for the year. It doesn't matter if you're a fiscal year, a calendar year in the system, governmental reporting of 1099-R and W-2 information requires that it is for the calendar year. So 12/31 is always our cutoff for payroll. We are going to first up make sure that we have processed all of our final payroll and have completed our period and quarter-end procedures. We're going to build the year-end wage file, and it holds all the information needed to produce our 1099s, and if you have to do 1099-Rs, those as well. In years past, and on the older versions of that, that was a huge ordeal because we had to do the W-2s, and once we did, we could never reprint them. And those of you who know, who have been on those older versions, know that today we can actually go in and reprint the W-2s as needed. So there's not quite as much anxiety in that process flow as what we used to have. We are going to obviously review and edit our W-2s. Now, most of you know it's never exactly perfect, is it, that very first pass? But we're going to go through and review it, make any adjustments that are necessary. Then we're ready to print our W-2s and 1099-Rs. And at the end of this, we're going to apply the new Dynamics GP tax tables. Now, usually those are available not too far from now on Customer Source for download. And typically we install these, and it really shouldn't say typically, we install these new tax tables after the payroll close. So we don't want to apply the 2015 tax tables before we've completed everything for 2014. Once that new tax table for 2015 has been installed, we can now process for our 2015 payroll. Next up, if we could go to the next slide, we'll talk about general ledger. And one of the myths is that, and we're going to see this on another slide, is that, oh, I have to close this out, I have to do it. Really, there's no need to close the general ledger immediately. There's nothing saying you have to do that. Once we are ready, we can finalize our journal entries and any adjustments coming over from those other modules. And we're going to post all those single-use batches. So again, if I have quarterly batches, monthly batches that are out there, the recurring type activities, that's fine. But I want to go through the series post for the financial module, make sure that I have all the batches that are non-recurring, single-use, posted, and the adjustments to 2015 done, or 2014 to be done. Once we've done that, we're ready to print our trial balance and have a look at our numbers, make sure we don't have to do any accruals or adjusting entries. And we're going to also run, most people are on Management Reporter right now. There might be a few people out there still on FRX. We're going to run our financials out of whatever financial report writer we're using. Obviously, we don't have to do that right away, but that's always a good idea. We are going to next up double check to make sure our posting to history flag is set the way that we want to. So most of you know that in the financial setups, we have a little flag that says allow posting to history. And that controls whether or not you're going to be able to reopen your prior year or not to post your audit adjustments. So we can check mark that appropriately, and also we want to make sure that we have all the boxes check marked for maintain history. There's really no reason not to have those check marked, except under certain conditions when we're doing fixes. We're going to talk about one of those here in a little bit. Once we've done that, we are going to run the GL year-end closing process. There's a big old button on it that says close year. Please make sure that you don't double click on that or click it twice because you think you didn't click it. I have had a number of clients that got a little click happy, ended up closing out, let's say, excuse me, 2014, and then turn around and click again. And guess what? It'll close 2015 right behind it if you're not careful. So please make sure you click it just one time. And if you have any issues during that processing, make sure that you restore from your backup and immediately address that. Do not wait. And we're going to talk about some more details about what we should be looking for with the general ledger. So here's a screenshot of year-end close. This is a little bit older one for those of you who are on the older versions of GP. When we get to the end, we'll be talking about the actual close screens for every single module and what we need to look for. And that screenshot will be the newer one. If you get a pop-up during year-end that says you must run the consolidate transactions and transfer blah, blah, blah. Once you get that, that tells you that you are running analytical accounting and you need to follow the transaction flows for analytical accounting as well. So there are some routines to make sure that that gets taken care of, and we're going to talk about that in a minute as well. If we could take a look at the next slide. So a couple little things to think about. Before you close the general ledger, and I cannot emphasize this enough, there are so many people that I wish I could have one of those Twilight Zone go back even 1 hour buttons to prevent some of the issues that they've run into with year-end. The most important thing you can do to prevent 90% of what I see as issues during year-end close is very simple, and that is to run a smart list under accounts. So go to financial, go to accounts, add the posting type to that list, run them in numerical order. Everything from retained earnings and above should be set to a balance sheet. Everything after retained earnings should be a profit and loss account. Make sure that is true. Please make sure that is true. If it isn't, make the appropriate adjustment. The system doesn't care if you take the cash account and tie it as a posting type P&L. During the year-end routine, the system looks at that posting type and says, all of my balance sheet accounts, I'm going to take your 2014 balance and I'm going to roll it forward to that BBF bucket or that period 0 bucket starting balance for 2015 because you told me it was a balance sheet account. If it's a P&L account, as you know, we close P&L accounts out to retained earnings and we reset those balances, those BBF records, to 0 so that the new year, first posting of sales, there's our new sales figure starting forward. The system doesn't care. It doesn't care if you take a cash account and say it's a P&L. It doesn't care if you take the sales account and say it's a balance sheet. Even though that's blatantly wrong, it's going to close those appropriately. Very important to make sure that's set. And we're going to talk about what if I didn't, what if I make that mistake. We'll talk about how to fix it too. But please, at year-end, you're so busy anyway. make sure that you have checked that, because you could save yourself hours of time making corrections. If you want to, you can close first to your test database, just as a double check to make sure that the flags are all set the way they should be. Doesn't hurt. The fiscal period setup under company fiscal periods, you can go in and close the 2014 modules. You don't have to, it's not mandatory, but you can go in there and mark those as closed and create the new calendar for 2015 at the same time. If we could take a look at the next slide. Here are some myths about year-end. I have to wait until all my adjusting entries arrive from the auditors before I can close the GL. Not true. We can close the GL as long as we say allow posting to history, have that check marked. We can go back in and reopen any of the periods, post to them, and those balances will automatically perhaps roll into retained earnings or stay forward in the balance sheet account. I am running my general ledger year-end close and it is stuck. Oh my gosh, I forget what version this was when this first became an issue. It was either 10 or GP 2010. Lots of people fell victim to this. When you're running it, it gets to about 50%. And it looks like it stops. It looks like it's not doing anything. And especially if you have a large amount of numbers or accounts for it to crunch through, that may be really obvious. Once it gets to 50%, just take a chill, grab a Diet Coke. It may hang there for a while. It is still processing, I promise you. Let it just do its thing. All of a sudden, it will jump to like 99%. And do the last few minute things and then be finished. Do not, please do not, I've had customers do this. Please do not close it out and think that it's failed or it's stuck. Let it finish out. It's just a big trick to lure you into worrying about something that isn't a problem. Next, fixed assets close is so easy. I just changed the year on the book, right? No, we actually have some closing processes to take care of with fixed assets. So no, that's not quite how that goes down. I can close receivables and payables whenever I get around to it. No, not true. Receivables were impacting the year-to-date sales and last year's sales figures for our customers if we don't close out at the appropriate time. And for payables, obviously we have 1099s to consider as well as the vendor this year, last year buckets of information. So no, you really can't close receivables and payables whenever you get around to it. If we could take a look at the next slide, we will continue talking about some of the troubleshooting with year-end close. So for payables, what do I do if my vendor amounts aren't correct? For those vendors who are 1099s, as you know, this may have happened to you before. If you don't quite have their vendor record set up properly as a 1099 vendor, and you start processing transactions, that transaction won't be flagged as a 1099 amount, and it won't update that bucket of 1099 information for the vendor. So we need to perhaps edit those amounts since the last close going through the vendor 1099 details. General ledger, we're going to talk about how do we reprint the year-end close reports. We're going to talk about what do we do if history transactions get removed accidentally. What do we do about posting to a historical year? And I have some new information about that because R2 made some significant changes that I'm very excited to share with you. What do we do if we have to clear unit accounts? What about fixing a P&L account and a balance sheet account? Although I know that's not going to happen to any of you, right? Because you're going to run that smart list first and verify those posting types. And if I get a divisional retained earnings error during close, what do I do? How do I fix it? And what if it says another user is closing the year? What do I do about that? So let's take a look at some of those troubleshooting on the next slide. We're going to step through. So if you look, we have a little red, yellow, green, like a stoplight. So red is our problem. The amounts for the vendor since the last close are incorrect. What is the cause? Well, transactions from the prior or next year get posted on or before the close in this particular instance. And the resolution, or our green go light, we're going to edit the amount since last close by going to the summary vendor card, put in our vendor in question, click the yearly button, and update or edit our values. So that's a pretty easy fix. Let's take a look at our next slide. We have a lot of GL ones. Sometimes, for whatever reason, the year-end close report doesn't print. Maybe we accidentally didn't print it, or the printer was offline, or any number of reasons. So what is the resolution? Well, we know that we can't reprint the year-end close. That's one of the only reports in the system you can't go back to and reprint. However, there's still a journal entry that gets created from that year-end close of all of our BBF records. So we can go to Reports, Financial, Cross-Reference, and then we can find that year-end close transaction and reprint that journal entry. So that's a pretty easy fix for that if you need that year-end close for the auditors. If we could take a look at the next slide, what happens if we do year-end close and suddenly our historical transactions are gone? Well, we are going to restore from a valid backup. Remember I said we always do backups. And sometimes it's pretty important to test those backups as well and make sure the backups are working properly. So in this case, if we accidentally close out our historical transactions, we're going to restore from a backup. We're going to go ahead and double check in the GL setup window. We're going to mark maintain history, and then we're going to close the year again. So again, we're going to go to our backup and restore, and then make sure the maintain history is set and reclose the year. So basically, it's a do-over in that circumstance. Next slide. Let's see what's up next. Clear unit accounts. In years past, and for those of you who are on older versions of GP, and I might have a mixed bag of people out in the audience today, but it used to be if you wanted to zero out the unit accounts so that you didn't have to do a journal entry to increase or decrease them to the new balances for the new year, you had to run a delete statement from the GL 120,000 table, which is listed here on the screen, because they were not cleared by the year-end process. So what you could do was complete your year-end close, make a backup, run the clear accounts script against the database, and then reconcile your closed and open years. Now we have the ability to clear unit accounts during the year-end close for the newer versions. Yay! Next up, the next thing on our list, posting to a historical year. So what happens if we suddenly have missing transactions or adjustments to be posted to a historical year? So, you know, I got a journal entry late or something happened and I have to make adjustments for it. I can now check the allow posting to history in the general ledger setup, post my transaction. A second transaction will be automatically posted that basically runs that transaction through the year-end close again, and then I can go back and uncheck allow posting to history in the general ledger setup. Now, in years past, before GP 2013 R2, we used to tell people you can only make changes to the most recent historical year. and that's always been true. But now in R2, those of you who have moved to the new version, you may have noticed on the year-end close screen, we have the ability to reopen prior years. When I saw it, I thought, there's no way that'll work. I have to say I was a little skeptical, but I recently tried this for a client. They had a need for it. They weren't live on the system yet, but they had closed everything out, all these historical years, and they found a problem. And I said, well, now's the time to test it out. It worked beautifully. So we reopened all those past years. We made our adjustment. We ran reconcile and then reclosed the years. It was fabulous. I loved it. So fixing a P&L account, we're going to talk about, even though I know none of you are going to have to do this, right? Everybody pinky swear. You're going to double check those posting types. But if something were to happen, let's say your lackey for the year-end did this and they didn't follow the instructions, if the problem is that you have balances that remained for P&L accounts, so that's the scenario, we have a balance in a P&L account, maybe it's sales. That means that the account posting type was not set up correctly. So that's an instance where we have to fix something that should have been a P&L account, but got set as a balance sheet account because it rolled forward a balance on the on the trial balance. How do we do this? There's a lot of steps to this. This is why I really want you to promise that you'll run that SMART list. I don't want you to have to do all this on top of your year end, on top of your quarter end, on top of your monthly processing. But if you do need to, you will want to log everyone out and prepare a backup. If you're registered to use multi-currency, you will need to first go to the multi-currency setup and unmark maintain history for GL accounts. Once you've done that, you'll want to run the script at the bottom of the screen that says N1. And basically, we're setting the history flag to 0 in the multi-currency table. Then we're going to unmark maintain history for accounts and transactions and mark allow posting the history, because now we have to do that in the general ledger setup. So financials, setup, and then general. We're going to go in there and unmark maintain history for accounts and transactions and mark the allow posting. Then we're going to enter a journal entry to correct the posting. Be sure to use the right date for the closed year. And to fix the account that has a credit beginning balance, credit the retained earnings and debit the P&L. For the debit balance, reverse that. So basically, we know during year-end close, everything closes to retained earnings, so that will always be your offset. Next, we're going to post that transaction. The transaction will only hit the current year. We will reverse the changes in step 3 that we did up above, and we will run the second script at the bottom if multi-currency is registered. So then we'll set that history flag back to a 1 in that table. Okay? A lot of steps. I don't want you to have to do this. But if you do, here it is. And if you don't feel comfortable with any of these, if you go, oh my gosh, I don't think I can do this, it seems like a lot, reach out to support, and we're happy to help you get through that. Next up, what happens if we have to fix a balance sheet account? So how does that look? Well, the balance is 0 for a balance sheet account. And basically, that posting type was set for a P&L. It got closed out. And as a result, the balance for, let's say, the cash account, sitting at 0. So the steps in this instance, similar, but not exactly the same. Log everybody out, make a backup. If multi-currency is registered, go to the multi-currency and unmark maintain history for GL accounts. Run that first script, setting that history flag to 0, correct the posting type, then unmark maintain history for accounts and transactions, and mark allow posting to history because we're going to have to do that. Enter the appropriate journal entry. Make sure to use the right date. I'm sure you will. If the balance sheet should have a credit beginning balance, credit the balance sheet account, debit retained earnings, and vice versa. If it needs to have a credit balance, the other side of the entry will always be retained earnings. Post the transaction. Reverse the changes in step 3, and then run that second script to set the flag back to a 1. So again, we have a lot of steps in both of those. They're slightly different depending on whether you had an account set as a balance sheet, should have been a profit and loss, or vice versa. Let's take a look at the next slide, because I know you're not going to have to fix those, right? If you get this error message that pops up when you click Close the Year that says the retained earnings account was not found, it's just not set up in your financial setups. So if the error is retained earnings account not found, then go to your setups for General Ledger under Financial Setups, General, and put in a retained earnings account for each department that has a profit and loss account. You may just have one, or you may have divisional retained earnings. All right, let's take a look at the next slide. Sometimes it just is contrary and says another user is closing, and you may know that that isn't true. So if you get the error, another user is posting, the year cannot be closed, again, you'll have to either do this yourself or get somebody from IT, or feel free to reach out to us and have a script run on the SY800 table where the batch number is set to GL close, and just get rid of that. Because what happens is if during the previous year-end close this field value or this record in the SY800 table doesn't get closed out properly, it just hangs out there, even though nobody's really closing out the year-end. And then the year-end close for the next year runs through and goes, hey, somebody's already in there doing this. That's just to make sure that Sally down the hall isn't trying to close out the general ledger at the same time I'm trying to do it at my desk. So that's why it's there for. There is also an automated fix for that. You can use that as well from Microsoft. Can we take a look at the next slide and talk about some of the best practices? Obviously, we want to make sure nobody is logged into GP during the year-end close procedure. We don't want to take the chance somebody's keying something in at the same time. We always want to make sure that we have 2 valid backups of the companies involved, so you may have a multi-company environment, and the Dynamics database. So do one before you start, and do a second one after you close. So do the first one before in case anything bad happens, but I know it won't because you're going through these steps and you're going to make a good list. Then we're going to verify posting types for all accounts by running our smart list. We're going to read all the documentation we can get our hands on and follow the order of the modules to close, which again is, I really pray for good accounting procedures. And then make sure you save or print your year-end close reports. Make sure you get those if you need them. We could go to the, so inventory close. Let's kind of demo this and kind of step through the process. So I've made some screenshots of what the year-end close screens look like. And for inventory, it looks a little bit like this. And again, I'm giving you screenshots of GP 2013 R2. You can tell by the ribbon across the top. This may look a little bit different than yours depending on what version you're running. We have the ability during year-end close for inventory to check mark optionally to remove discontinued items, to remove sold lot attributes if you're doing lot tracking on your inventory items, and to remove any sold receipts and cost change history prior to a particular date. And if you check mark that, the little date box will become active. And for those of you who might be running standard cost or doing manufacturing or something of that nature, there's also a checkbox to update the item's standard cost. Not a lot to it, is there? Then for receivables, we kind of have for receivables and payables both this little duality of being able to close for the fiscal year or being able to close for the calendar year. And obviously we close for the calendar year for payables in particular because we have to capture that 1099 information. Just like for payroll, we have to capture everything at the end of the year for 1099s, W-2s, things of that nature. In the case of receivables, we have two checkboxes. That way, if we have a different fiscal year, we can still capture on some of those inquiries for our customers what their year-to-date sales figures are. And we could do that based on our year, not necessarily the calendar year. And on those types of screens, you will know that there's that information impacts because there'll be a toggle switch that says amount since last close, or if you drop down the box, it'll say fiscal year or calendar year. You usually have an option on those inquiries to look at it in any one of those three ways. On your system, because I've just installed mine and have never run a year-end close because R2 just came out in May, my last closing dates are set to 0 on my system. Yours will tell you the last time you closed the fiscal year, last time you closed the calendar year, so you can eyeball it, make sure you don't close it out twice. If you want to, you can print a report at the end of that. And payables, that's okay, go ahead. For payables, screen looks almost identical. We have that same toggle switch, year to close, all, or fiscal or calendar. We can do them independently. Print a report, and also shows us the last closing date for fiscal and calendar. And then a little button, obviously, at the bottom. I didn't mention it, but there's the close button to close the year. Let's take a look at, next up, general ledger and analytical accounting. And you'll notice on this screen there's no particular, oh, this is my payables year end. This is not my GL. But on the GL, we have a checkbox at the bottom that says whether or not we want to clear our analytical accounting options. Nope, you're fine. Go ahead. Payroll looks like this. Big red bold, create year-end wage file for year 2014 and process. Pretty straightforward there. Not a lot of options with it, not a lot of checkboxes. And let's take a look at next up, and that would be any questions and answers that we have for our session. And I'm sure that the folks out there probably have tons of questions or things that have happened in the past that you'd like to know why or how I can prevent that from happening again.
Okay, so as I indicated at the beginning of the presentation, by the way, thank you, Jackie, good job. And then we, at the bottom of the dialog box, there's a little area to enter your questions in there. So we'll give a moment to enter any questions. We've got a couple coming through already, and then we'll go forward with Q&A.
Sounds great. I know people probably have tons of questions out there. And if you ask me how do I get through year end, I have too much work to do, I can't help you with that one. But just make a good checklist, and that will reduce the majority of the anxiety around year end.
Okay, the first question, how much extra disk space should I have for GL year-end close? And if I need to do inventory receiving before year-end close, how do I do that?
Awesome questions. Well, the first one for general ledger, how much disk space? I have seen clients run into a situation where they close out the general ledger and it fails right in the middle of it because they ran out of disk space. It's important to remember that at the time of year-end close in the general ledger, not only are we updating all those balances and closing out balances to retained earnings, but the stored procedures that actually run that little process, the programs that are running in the background, are going to the open tables for the general ledger. And they're taking that information in the open table, which is called GL 20,000, and taking that information and creating a temporary table and then moving that to GL 30,000. So there is a point in time where GL 20,000 is duplicated before it is moved over to the history table, which is GL 30,000. So because of that, if you have a lot of GL accounts and a lot of detailed transactions for the year, that could be a constraint on your system. So you should make sure that you have enough disk space to duplicate the GL 20,000 table. That's what's key. Good question. So the other one about what if I have to do receivables processing before I'm ready to do my year-end close? That is a great question because that happens a lot, doesn't it? We have trucks coming in and out all the time from our vendors, and there's a little person that stands on the dock there, and they get the paperwork. They need to recognize that inventory has gone into and has become available for sale, but we may not need to or want to post those transactions yet to 2015. So in that case, in receivables, we're just going to create a batch, and we can call it 2015 if we want to, and all of our receivables transactions, go ahead and bring those in and save those to the 2015 batch. Once year-end has been done and we're ready to let people process for the new year, then they can post the receivables batch. But in the meantime, let's get those inventory balances updated and make sure that 2015 stays pure and untainted. Good questions. Do we have any other questions, Paris?
Okay, let's see. And then someone mentioned that they're taking this for CPE credit, and once again, if you're taking this for CPE credit, make sure you send an email to the email address that I'll provide in just a few moments here, and then will a copy of the slides be emailed? Yes, you will be receiving a copy of the entire presentation after this.
And I highly recommend as well that you go out to Microsoft and get the year-end procedures for each of the modules that you actively are working on. You can also just go to Google and Google Dynamics GP year-end general ledger, for example. And make sure you put the year on there too so you don't get an older version. And you should get a hit on those and can print those out. They're really, really good resources.
All right. Well, thank you, Jackie. I think that's it for questions now. And we'll just move forward now. Next slide, please. Here. Slides aren't advancing. Okay. Well, I just wanted to mention that MIG does